All right, everybody, welcome back into another episode of Stadium Seat Sports. As always, I'm Coop here with my partner and co-host Kriv. And today, Kriv, we got our national championship matchup set. We're going to do another video previewing that game between Ohio State and Notre Dame. In this one, we're going to be talking about the Orange Bowl between Notre Dame and Penn State, the outcome, our thoughts on that game, and then the Cotton Bowl as well between Ohio State and Texas, which sets up our national championship again between Ohio State and Notre Dame. So I think it's right that we start off with the Orange Bowl. Game took place first this past Thursday. This was a really interesting game to me because we touched on it in our preview. We said these teams are very similar, and I think that we saw a lot of similarities play out on the field between these two teams. So
Yep.
I'll throw it over to you first. Get your thoughts on the game, maybe some potential, if not repercussions, fallouts for each program from the results of the game, and then I'll give you my thoughts as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of hit the nail on the head here when we talked about this game before it happened. Very similar teams, similar styles, similar limitations, you could say. And that first half, I mean, it was a snooze fest. It
Mm-hmm.
was terrible. Notre Dame could not get anything going at all. Uh, Penn State blew some very easy opportunities. I think was it Singleton who dropped the touchdowns on that
Yes.
screen.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
mean, it wasn't a perfect pass. Still probably should have caught
Yeah.
it.
It was a little low, but it should have been caught.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, that right there it ended up being a field goal that decided the
Mm-hmm.
game.
Yeah. I mean, they lost
Ultimately,
by three. That would have been a difference of 4 points right there.
yeah. And I'll
That's a
say
great
that.
point.
And I'll also say this: Notre Dame had nothing going. Riley Leonard couldn't get anything going.
Mm-hmm.
Um, had trouble running the ball. Had trouble passing the ball. And then all of a sudden, Leonard gets hurt, and Jelly comes in, and he does a little 2 minute drill and leads him right downfield and gets him that late
Yeah.
field goal to go into half, and that kind of
Mm-hmm.
changed the tide there for them. And Notre Dame has even against Georgia, they have these moments where the game kind of flips on its head in a very short time period. Now, obviously, um, that didn't necessarily happen in this game, but in Georgia, I think it was like they had like 14 points in 1 minute of game time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Notre Dame does a great job of taking advantage of the middle eight, as like Ryan Day
yeah,
puts it when he talks about the middle eight at that end of the second quarter, beginning of the third quarter. Notre Dame takes advantage of it as good as anybody, truthfully.
yeah, and I mean they sort of did that. They went beyond the middle eight because they got that field goal.
Yeah.
They got a touchdown. Riley Leonard comes back, gets a touchdown, and then Jeremiah Love has that incredible touchdown 2 yard run, but he's
Yeah. That
bouncing off
effort was
everyone,
amazing. Yeah.
and it was on one leg. Like
Yeah.
the guy,
He
the
also
guy,
said, I'm not supposed to hurdle in this game. And we saw what he did. So
yeah,
the guy can't
exactly,
help himself. But you know
yeah.
what? I'm not sitting here complaining.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, credit to Notre Dame for one, when they were down 10-0 and they had nothing going, I honestly thought that might be it for them.
Mhm.
They looked despondent. That offense looked dead.
Yeah.
And Marcus Freeman just has a way of his team's not quitting and then also just finding a
Mhm.
way. Um, but really, I mean, for me, it's more Penn State missed opportunities
Sure.
than Notre Dame. Don't get me wrong, they stepped up and they made some big plays, but like that Drew Aller interception at the end of the game, no
Yep.
reason to do that. Aller said he claims he was trying to just dirt the ball, which I mean, watch the play. He was not throwing it away or
No.
trying to dirt
No.
it. He threw it well beyond that. So
Yeah.
um, he
Yep.
he he was a disappointment in that game.
Mhm.
He showed he still has a lot of room to grow. Um, Notre Dame just they did not hurt themselves that much, and Penn State did. Penn State had the drop touchdown pass, they had the interception, they had mistakes. So really, for me, Penn State had a lot of lost opportunities. Notre Dame, on the other hand, they did everything they could within their power. I don't think they were nearly as talented as Penn State was, as crazy as that sounds. Uh, but Penn State does not have the receivers. They have a inconsistent quarterback, and it
Mhm.
showed. And
Yeah.
they put Notre Dame in position to win the game, and they took advantage of every opportunity. So kudos to them.
Mhm.
But I mean, they lost their starting left tackle. He's already ruled out for the next game. Their another guard is banged up. He's
Yep,
questionable. They overcame some injuries in this game, but
they did.
they took a beating, and it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, and sorry about having to step away there. Had to get dinner off the stove, but I'm sure you made some great points while I was away for about 20 seconds there.
And
But
I'm sure you made a great dinner. So
that's right. That's right. I'm excited to eat it after this recording here.
yeah,
But no, I mean, I thought that you touched on a lot of points that I was also going to touch on. Number one, like we mentioned, Notre Dame does a fantastic job of taking advantage of that middleweight. And you made mention they did a little bit beyond that. But you go back to the Georgia game, they didn't really have to do so against the Indiana Hoosiers. No disrespect to them, but
yeah,
Notre Dame had that game well in control from the jump. But they did the same thing against Georgia. They did it again against Penn State. And I have so many thoughts about this game because, in part, it feels that Penn State failed. They came up short in a game that they were largely controlling for that entire first half. Obviously, Notre Dame came in, got a field goal right before halftime. That was a big momentum swing, and then Notre Dame was going to get the ball to start the second half. We know what they did. And then ultimately, they end up winning the game on a last second field goal, which is, I mean, this game was, you complained about blowouts in the first couple of rounds. This game was as close as it could get. Obviously it was 10-0 to start, but Notre Dame
yeah,
jumped back in and we got a last second field goal to pick the victor in this one. But I think the craziest thing to me, and we know Penn State's wide receiver room is not like Ohio State's wide receiver room. Their wide receivers had zero receiving yards in this game. Zero.
insane,
I mean, that
insane.
that is literally one of the craziest things I have ever heard in my life. I know they have an absolute freak in Tyler Warren. He's the best in all of college football at that position. Like, he's amazing. But their wide receivers had zero receiving yards. And the
Yeah,
fact of the matter is when Drew Aller was pushing that ball, he wasn't trying to dirt it, like you said. Like, I get where he's coming from. He made a mistake. He probably had his worst game of the season. Probably not even arguably. It was his worst game of the season
it's
in this
bad.
game, unfortunately.
Yeah,
But it's like you're throwing now. Granted, Warren, if you watch that play take place, Warren was his first option. He checked down to Warren. Warren was covered. There was nothing there. He checked down to his second option. So that guy was his third option. I can't remember what receiver it was, but he was his third option. But it's just like that decision making when your receivers have had zero success all night long in that kind of moment is just a little bit head scratching to me. I'm not saying that you just like take a knee, you go to overtime. Like, no, you want to go try to win the game, but it's just that kind of decision making there from Aller. I'm not even really going to put much of it on James Franklin in that regard in terms of that play call.
yeah,
Um, but at the same time, James Franklin did what James Franklin has done consistently, which is lost to a top five team. And when I talk about James Franklin, when you talk about James Franklin, probably when most Penn State fans talk about James Franklin, he is not a bad football coach at all. It's not like in these top five matchups, he's getting the doors blown off of him. He's close. He's very close. Like when you get these top five matchups against elite competition, the smallest margins can be what decides the game. I mean, when we talk about Ohio State, Texas, we're going to talk about some very small margins that ended up deciding that football game. Like when you get relatively equal talent, it the one or two decisions, the one or two bounces that go one way for a team versus another way for a team can make the difference in these games because they're so equally uh, talented. The schematics were the same for this team. Like, I'm not putting this loss entirely on James Franklin. There were some decisions from him that I think are questionable that he's going to be scratching his head about. But that final sequence and just from Aller and the drop from Singleton, like you mentioned, like, there's just so many opportunities Penn State had, and I think that's what, if you're a Penn State fan, like that has got to be just absolutely brutal
and
because you're like, this was our opportunity to break through. Not that they won't have opportunities in the
yeah.
future, but you're like, man, we should have won this game. And I'm not
I
taking anything away from Notre Dame, by the way, but
Yeah, and I think two quick points there. it felt like Aller missed a couple throws in the game that probably would
Hmm.
have resulted in scores or at least put
Yeah.
him in scoring position.
Hmm.
There was multiple of those. Okay.
Yeah.
I remember there's like a wheel route or something to one of the running backs again that he just overthrew. It was a
Hmm.
touchdown.
Yep.
Um, and I think for Penn State fans and their perception on James Franklin, it's great that they made it as far as they did. They had probably the easiest path they will see
Correct.
going forward. That will not happen again. And I Notre Dame is very talented. I think Penn State has a slight edge there, and I think
I
that's
do
what
too.
and I think that's what hurts the most for them because
Correct.
this lined up with them very well to
Hmm.
make it, and it didn't
And
happen.
right. And that's where I say Penn State has failed and James Franklin has failed because I and you, and I think most people in the country think that highly of the talent that Penn State has on that roster year in and year out.
Yeah.
And that's why I consider it a failure. It's not a failure that you're not winning the national championship or in the national championship year in and year out. That in and of itself is not a failure. We've touched on this. Like that's the Nick Saban effect, where it's like he has the greatest college football coach of all time. He has ruined expectations for a lot of programs, a lot of fans thinking that that is going to be the norm. It's not, especially in this new age of college football with 12 teams where you have to play 15, 16,
Yep.
17 games in a season and go through a gauntlet to get to the national championship and win it. It's not going to be the norm. It's never was never going to be the norm. Even if we didn't go to 12, it wasn't going to be the norm.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Penn State is very talented year in and year out. I mean, that defense every year is disgusting. They just reload. You've got two of the best running backs in the entire country in your backfield. Drew Aller has all of the tangibles to be a fantastic quarterback, both at college and moving into the NFL. So it's just, you have had so many opportunities. And I know you've got to go through, juggernauts like Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon in your own conference, but this 12 team playoff was set up perfectly for you to go through SMU, Boise State, and then a Notre Dame team that I respect the hell out of. But that was an easier matchup than what would have been Texas for you or Oregon or Ohio State. Like this
Yeah.
set up for you to get to the national championship game. But enough about the Penn State side. Let me touch on Notre Dame really quickly because they were the ones that won this game. Utmost respect to Marcus Freeman, that coaching staff, Riley Leonard, the toughness, the grit. Uh, Jeremiah Love, you already mentioned it. I mean, that guy's absolutely incredible. He's got a banged up knee and is taking on multiple Penn State defenders,
Yep.
multiple ridiculously talented Penn State defenders and strong Penn State defenders, mind you. He just willed himself in that Notre Dame team to that touchdown there. Um, the one thing I will say about Notre Dame that would give me hesitation or a little bit of alarm. You touched on it. They have suffered so many injuries. They've suffered a lot of injuries at some very key uh, positions on the field, both offensively and defensively. This Notre Dame team, Marcus Freeman, they're not going to take any shortcuts. They're not going to play the blame game or anything like that. Like they will have their team ready. They will be ready for war next Monday, January 20th at 7:30 for the national championship game. But it's just that offensive and defensive line, they've suffered some pretty significant injuries there from some really good starters. And maybe they get healthy in the 9-ish days that they have off between the Orange Bowl and the national championship game. But if they don't, that could be a little bit of a problem because Abdul Carter, think the world of him. The guy was playing hurt. He was basically playing with one arm, and
Yeah.
he was able to get pressure a significant amount of the
Yeah,
time
he
on
was
Riley
good.
Leonard.
Yeah.
And the Ohio State team that we've seen in the postseason, they have 16 sacks in the postseason.
Well, I'll
JTT,
say
Jack Sawyer are wrecking havoc.
yeah. Yeah. I'll say this. Let's save this insight for the preview.
Yeah, yeah, we can do that. I'm just
Yeah. Yeah.
the injuries concern me a
Yes.
little bit.
Yes, I
So
agree. I agree.
I fully give a lot of respect to Notre Dame. It was a gritty win, came back from 10-0, ultimately beat a really good Penn State team, and I think both of our opinions here. And Notre Dame, they just you thought after 10-0 it should have been 14-0, 17-0 Penn State, but you thought it might be out of reach. And this Notre Dame team just does what it has done all year, which is it just claws and fights its way back.
Yeah,
Like
they
there's a
never give
grittiness
in.
and a toughness to that team that I think is instilled from the top down. Marcus Freeman, Al Golden, like that coaching staff embodies what this team then embodies,
Yeah.
and it's impressive. So
Great
Notre Dame's
culture, great
yeah,
game planning.
Yeah, so Notre
Yeah.
Dame's going to be moving on to the national championship, and like we already mentioned, we're going to touch base and do a deep dive into that fascinating matchup between Ohio
Oh yeah.
State and Notre Dame. So let's move on to the next game here. I can give you my thoughts first on the Cotton Bowl
Yeah.
between Ohio State and Texas. I think there's a lot to unpack here because, truthfully, similar to the Penn State side, where it was like their receivers had 0 yards receiving in that game. If you would have told an Ohio State fan or just a college football fan in general who maybe didn't get to watch the game, Ohio State's going to have 9 penalties for 75 yards or something around there. Jeremiah Smith's going to have 1 catch for I think 3 yards. They're going to be playing from behind the sticks like second and 20, third and 17 constantly throughout the night. You'd have thought Ohio State lost that football game.
Yeah.
And you're going to say Ohio State's offense scored 21 points, that high clip offense. You're going to sit there and be like, Ohio State lost that game
Yeah.
against a very talented Texas defense. They didn't, as we know. They won 28-14, 14-point win. Game was a lot closer than a 14-point victory here. Obviously, Jack Sawyer scoop and score, 83 yards, longest defensive touchdown in the college football playoff history. Amazing play. We'll touch on it. But to me, I think Ohio State needed a game like this, truthfully, after absolutely obliterating Tennessee, demolishing Oregon in the fashion with which they were doing so. This, to me, Texas took the Michigan game plan and said, you're not going to beat us over the top. Like, we are not going to let your freak wide receivers get behind us and torch us like they
Yeah.
did Tennessee, like they did Oregon. We're not going to let it happen. You're going to have to run it. You're going to have to play maybe little screen plays. You're going to have to take long, sustained drives to beat us. You're not going to do these flashy 3, 4, 75-yard touchdown play drives. It's just not going to happen. And that's why I think this was so impressive for Ohio State, because they took away what they do best and what they wanted to do, which was get the ball to those absolutely incredible wide receivers. And yet they were still able to come out victorious. Like, I think this was a very good test for Ohio State to say, we failed in that Michigan game against the same style of game plan. We did it against this Texas defense, which I think personally, right up there with Ohio State, is top 2 defense in all of college football. That defense is absolutely disgusting. Jahdae Barron, Colin Simmons, you mentioned it in the preview of this game. Like, that defense is absolutely nasty. And so I want to tip my hat to Ohio State here, because I think Texas had a phenomenal game plan. I think Texas's defense played incredibly, and Ohio State weathered the storm when they didn't have their best game.
Yeah.
Both from a penalty standpoint, explosiveness standpoint. Like, I thought the Ohio State team showed a lot of toughness and a lot of grit, and that was good, because the Notre Dame defense is very, very good as well, and I would fully expect them to maybe try and institute a similar game plan defensively in the national championship, and we'll break that down more when we do that video. But this Ohio State team is so talented. They showed you we can beat you in a multitude of ways. Receivers, running backs, that play where Will Howard converted the 4th down and then the turf monster got him.
Yeah.
It was set.
Always.
It was, yeah, right. It was set up by nothing but pure will from G. Scott Jr.
Yeah.
Like, he was potentially going to be 4th and 5, maybe 4th and 4, and he second efforted his way to get it to a 4th and 2, a very manageable 4th and 2 for Ohio State. Like, they just were fighting throughout that entire game, and Texas put them in that kind of situation where it was like, we're going to be physical with you, and we are pretty much as talented as you are, roster top to bottom. I thought that this was an incredible game. It wasn't the prettiest game in terms of flashiness like we saw from the Tennessee game, the Oregon game. Like, it didn't have like the explosivity that maybe we had come accustomed to seeing from Ohio State in the postseason. But it was the exact kind of game I think that the Buckeyes needed to get into the national championship, to feel, hey, we can win in a multitude of ways. We don't have to hit, Jeremiah Smith for 10 catches and 185 yards and 3 touchdowns to win. Like, if you can do that, fantastic. The guy's an absolute beast. But this was a good litmus test for Ohio State, I think, to be like, okay, we can be put in a rock fight and win. To talk about the Texas side here, I want to give all credit to Texas. I think Texas's defense was stupendous. I already touched on it. I think their game plan was amazing. I think Ohio State from the defensive side did an incredible job because people always touch on it. Um, Steve Sarkisian is like the offensive guru, the offensive genius. Typically, he takes on the first two or three drives of offense, and Texas has a lot of success. Well, Ohio State stopped them
Yeah.
on all three of their first attempts, and even beyond that. And so I thought that that was really impressive by the Ohio State defense. From the Texas side, it was the same thing. They had difficulty running the ball. And if they have difficulty running the ball, it puts a lot of pressure on Quinn Ewers to make throws. And oftentimes Quinn Ewers can make some beautiful throws. I mean, that pitch out to the was it the running back? Was it Blue
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
his knee hit? I mean, that was absolutely incredible. That was a play where you're like, that's why everybody's so high on Quinn Ewers.
Yeah.
But then he makes some mistakes where he misses some receivers. Granted, I can't remember what receiver it was. I
There's
don't
some
think it was.
drops. There were some
Yeah, was it?
drops. It was
Yeah, I can't
Bond. I
remember
think
which
Bond. I think
was it
Bond
Bond
jumped. He
where he
jumped for no
jumped and he
reason.
had no
Yeah.
reason to jump and he dropped it.
Yeah.
It was clearly a first down. Um, so this is not all on Quinn Ewers by any means. The one thing I will say about Quinn Ewers, got a beautiful throw. He steps up into pressure more than he needs to, I think. Like Ohio State did a great job of collapsing the
Yeah. Yeah.
pocket,
He
but Quinn
panics.
Ewers steps in
Yeah.
into that tight and closed pocket and finds himself getting sacked or having to throw the ball away, what have you. Like
Yeah.
he he almost causes himself more problems than if he didn't step into the pocket. So that's one thing I will say on Quinn Ewers that is just something that I think needs to grow and needs to get cleaned up. But outside of that, like I thought Quinn Ewers was not the reason that Texas lost this football game. Truthfully, in my opinion, I thought that really it was the Ohio State defense that did a phenomenal job of trying to make Texas as one-dimensional as possible in terms of trying to take away the run. The one thing that Texas was having success on was the wheel route to the running back throwing it. That's
Yeah.
where their two touchdowns came from. Like
Same
Blue
play.
got two
Same play.
touchdowns literally on the same play. The first play, Sonny Styles, incredible athlete, got stuck on Blue. As good of an athlete as Sonny Styles is, he's not keeping up with him there. The next play, no one was on him because Sonny Styles then Ohio State did an all-out blitz and
Yeah.
Blue just waltzed into the end zone untouched. Like, well, I don't know if Lathan Ransom touched him as he fell down, but like
Yeah.
essentially
Yeah.
the same thing. And so they were having so much success there. And I'll let you touch on this, a little bit more in depth because I think I kind of hit on a lot of things that I wanted to touch on. But the play call at the end of the game, you have first and goal from the 1. You get stuffed. The Ohio State defense is incredible in the red zone. They did it against Nebraska. They did it against Penn State. Like they did it against Oregon in the initial the first game that they played this year. Like Ohio State's defense in the red zone is no joke. It's
It's
incredibly
elite.
good.
Yeah.
But and I think that there was a quote from Jack Sawyer, which I just absolutely loved. It was something along the lines of "Give us an inch and we'll defend it."
Yep.
I think that just
That's a
embodies this
yeah.
Ohio State team so much. But that toss play on second and goal from the 2 or the 1, wherever they ended up being for second and goal. I mean, you're not going to beat Ohio State, a team of that caliber, to the side. Like they're just too elite. But at the same time, I'm going to focus a little bit less on that play call and give more credit to Caleb Downs. And Caleb Downs shot the gap there. Like that is why Caleb Downs, in my opinion, is the best defensive player in all of college football right there.
Yeah.
Like
He
that
didn't
guy,
he didn't take him down, but he pushed him back.
right.
He
And
slowed him
then
down,
Ransom
and then
came in.
Ransom closed out. So
Yeah, Ransom
it
and
changed
Igbenogson
everything. Yeah.
closed in. Like it wasn't a great play call. Two things can be true at once. It wasn't a great play call, but also that was just an incredible play by an absolute freak athlete in Caleb Downs, the best defensive player in the country, in my opinion. So
Yeah.
like,
I,
I think both things are true.
Yeah,
And
and
then,
I think the play
yeah,
recognition by Downs is elite, and
hmm
because he shot the gap and he went outside. If that
yeah,
ended up being a run up the middle,
hmm
easy score, but
yeah,
he recognized the play and he went after it, and not there's not many people that can do that. So I
yeah.
know people want to go after Sark for this, but it wasn't that bad of a play call. It was just a better play by
Yeah,
Downs.
and that's what I'm saying. Like, it wouldn't have been my first choice as a play caller, but again, I'm not a college football
Yeah.
coach. Like I don't get paid millions of dollars or, close to $1 million to make these decisions. So I would trust Sark a lot more than I would trust myself or, anybody else on a podcast or on like an X account. I think it was just more of an incredible play by Caleb Downs and that Ohio State defense. So I'll throw it over to you. I touched on a lot of points here.
Yeah.
I feel like you're going to have a good amount to say. So let's hear
So
your thoughts.
yeah. So my first point here, super high level, but Ohio State, Texas on paper and on the field, talent wise, they
Mm-hmm.
are as close to equals as you can look at. Compare
Yep.
the recruits, the roster, however you want to look at it. Very similar pedigrees across the board. The other big thing is very similar physical capabilities as well. When you look at both sides, both
Mm-hmm.
teams, they look like NFL rosters. Like every
Yeah.
guy looks gigantic and a physical freak, and that's not common. If
Mm-hmm.
Ohio State's playing another team, they might have a lot of guys like
Yeah.
that, but very rarely is it close to equal. And that was truly the case here. For me, Texas kind of continued the same trajectory they had all year. They never put together an entire game at
Sure.
any point. Uh,
It's a fair statement.
yeah, and I think, but I also think at the same time, I think Ohio State played a C plus game. They averaged on third down
Would you say
30.
overall? Because I would say defensively, I would give them like an A minus
Well,
and
well,
then maybe a B plus.
I'd say that's kind of fair, but I mean the problem is those two touchdowns, and Jim Knowles actually took blame for that because he both
Sure.
touchdowns he was too aggressive and he put guys in bad positions.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
those
Sure. Sure.
those are fixable situations, and that's why I'm
Mhm.
not giving them a high score because those two scores were entirely avoidable.
Sure.
And just to kind of walk through the progress of this game here, Ohio State gets a stop, gets the
Mhm.
ball, scores. They make it look easy. You go, oh
Yep.
boy, here we go. Here's
Yeah.
the
You're thinking the avalanche is coming again.
yeah, here the buzzsaw is coming. They get another stop. They get the ball back. They're moving downfield. Will Howard's hitting very tight windows. You could call him risky or not, but he was completing
The
them.
man's slinging the rock.
I think they get to about the 39-yard line. Henderson runs the ball, gets up, smacks the guy in the face, 15-yard penalty. Honestly, in my opinion, if he doesn't do that, they come away with the score on that drive. I truly
Yeah,
believe that.
I fully agree with you, and
And
that's
to
so
get,
uncharacteristic of Henderson too. Like
yeah,
of any player,
yeah,
would not have been my
yeah.
guess.
And honestly, if that happens, this is an entirely different game,
Sure.
it'd be a blowout.
I think it's very
It
likely 10
changed.
nothing or 14 nothing if that does not happen.
Yeah, and once it, let's say they go up 14 nothing, psychologically speaking, especially with how Ohio State had been playing, Texas would have probably been checked out. They would have been fully bought into the Ohio State buzzsaw, and there's
Sure.
nothing they can do.
Well, I mean,
But
look, Ohio State, now it's a country, they're 42 points in the first quarter to opponents having zero in this
yeah,
postseason. 42 to nothing. I mean, that's an incredible stat. And like you mentioned, probably would have been more had Henderson not had that personal foul.
yeah.
You know,
Well, yeah, and then outside of so once that happens, it just becomes a stalemate
mm-hmm.
over and over. And then you go, it takes Texas all game, and they get that 2 minute drive. Blue gets that receiving touchdown, which once again, one that was very close to just being downed by Quinn Ewers.
Sure.
And I
Mm-hmm.
can't recall that was that the same drive where Arch Manning ran the ball.
Yes.
I think it
Yeah. He
was.
converted the fourth
And
down.
that was very
There is the
near.
fumble recovery.
Yeah. So like that
I almost
was
wonder if he took a head injury there because he didn't come in again. I was surprised on that goal line stand
yeah.
where they were first and goal at the one that he didn't come in.
They
You know what I
they
mean?
they
Like,
they have very rarely used him.
it's so
Sark
weird.
Sark decided to go down with Quinn, and I understand because Quinn helped save the program in a sense. So
Yeah, I mean, I get that. Your
um,
loyalty to Quinn, I think, is commendable if you're
yeah.
Sarkeesian in Texas, but
But yeah,
it's a
so
bizarre call to
but
me.
my point being, there's two things there: that potential fumble and Quinn Ewers with that little shuffle pass. Though that was literally inches away from changing the game too. And then you have terrible defensive call, blew wide open on Sonny Styles. That's just a mismatch. I don't, they didn't have to blitz. They were getting pressure with four guys, but that caught them off guard. Then of course Henderson gets that honestly the game-saving screenplay because if they don't score there, Texas has all the momentum, and even though they're getting the
Sure.
ball, Ohio State has not moved the ball at all prior to that.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, Henderson both blew the momentum in the first half and then gained it
Brought it
right back.
back. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it was
And
incredible.
then you start the second half, and I was a little frustrated with Ryan Day and Chip Kelly because the play calling just didn't seem as creative as before.
That's fair.
They ran a couple times to the teeth of the defense, and then
Mm-hmm.
the very
Similar
first
to Michigan.
yeah, and the very first drive, it was 3rd and 1. They had been doing quarterback sneaks all year long, and they decide to do a toss to Judkins, gets
Mm-hmm.
stuffed, punt it. That killed momentum. They had 3 and out to start the second half, where they once
Yeah.
again they had a chance to take momentum or at least get a drive going.
Sure.
Then
Sure.
Jaden Blue again, wide open touchdown,
Mm-hmm.
all
And
out
that was the
blitz.
first. I I don't know if it was just the postseason or if it was all year that Texas hadn't scored in the third quarter, like a touchdown. But they had not scored a touchdown in the
Yeah,
third quarter.
they
I
were
don't know if it was
very
postseason or if it was like literally all year.
Yeah, I don't think it was all year, but they're a bad third quarter team.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they tie the game up. Uh, and then when they needed it the most, Will Howard made some very clutch throws, especially on that third down to Carnell Tate.
Yeah, that was a
Um,
beautiful throw.
he obviously he should have ran in for a touchdown, but ironically, him falling and then them taking a little more time off the clock worked out well.
It did. It
And
did.
then of course, I mean, Texas gets all the way downfield, and that defense does their job. Sawyer, the rest is history. We already talked about it, and for me, I agree that Ohio State needed a win like this, and I think it was more for a psychological aspect of they got the sense that they are beatable, at least
Mm-hmm.
in a sense, because the first 2 games they probably felt like no one can touch us. If they
Correct.
if they if they beat the crap out of Texas and they came in like uber confident against Notre Dame, I'd be concerned. So,
Yeah, you
um,
you almost felt like they could be reading their press clippings because again,
yeah,
everyone's like, if Ohio State plays like this, they're unbeatable.
yeah,
And truthfully, no team is unbeatable. And this was a good
yeah.
game for them.
This was a huge test.
Mm-hmm.
Texas, I mean, the talent's there. They have a bright future. I'm very excited to see what they look like with Arch Manning. That might be
Yeah.
that next step they need to take that to hit that next gear.
Hey,
They're right there.
and don't
So,
forget, these two teams play again. First game of the year this upcoming
yeah,
season. Texas comes to Columbus, I think like August 30th or
yeah,
something right around there. It's going to be
yep,
great. It's
yeah.
going to be the
So,
Arch Manning probably versus Julian Sayin show. So
yeah.
be excited for that one.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of exciting things, but yeah, we'll have a preview video coming out for the national championship, Ohio State and Notre Dame. It's going to be a good
Yeah.
one. Lots of interesting talking points to go over that. That'll
Yep.
come out later this week. Coop, you have anything else to say there?
No, the only thing I'm going to close with before we kind of do just our generic close here is that I do think that that goal line stand by and then the Jack Sawyer, forced fumble and run back for 83 yards touchdown, that scoop and score, one will live in Ohio State infamy. Like it was almost the defensive equivalent. You could maybe even make an argument that it's better than like 85 yards through the heart of the South, Ezekiel Elliott against Alabama in the inaugural 14 college football playoff. Like it had the same kind of feel where it was like Ohio State had something go its way, similar to that game against Alabama, where it was like we got through Goliath, which was Alabama. And now Ohio State and Ryan Day, they've made it to the top of the mountain. They haven't hit the peak yet. The peak is winning the national championship, but they've made it to the top. Can they take that next step and get to the very, very peak by beating
Yeah.
Notre Dame in the national championship game? So that
One quick
that
note,
play, yeah,
that play only could be equal to Zeke's if they win it all. If they don't,
correct,
then it means
correct.
nothing. So,
Correct. 100%. 100%. I think that that's a perfect, way to look at it. But it was a momentous moment in that game for obvious reasons. But I think if Texas scores there and it goes down into overtime, Ohio State fans are sweating, a decent amount because I think Ohio State had so many opportunities to kind of put that game away and they didn't. And
yeah.
Texas is far too talented of a team to let them hang around. So it was momentous for so many reasons. So Just kudos to Jack Sawyer, the Ohio State Buckeyes, and Notre Dame
Yep.
Fighting Irish. We're going to have a great national championship preview here. So everybody, thank you so much for tuning in, for listening to any of our podcast episodes here. Always appreciate you guys. We got one more game left in the college football season, so let's soak it in, enjoy it, and I can't wait to do the preview for this game.
Yeah, absolutely.